Hi, welcome to the Drama-Free Living Podcast. It's Dennis and Lisa McIntee. And Lisa, we've had a lot of success with emotionally intelligent and that particular communication system. So I think what we thought would be fun over the next maybe 2 weeks is just maybe get some practical tips for people about what can we do to become more emotionally intelligent so that we are really less reactive and more interactive and produce better results? And Lisa, you had some interesting maybe surveys that you came up with or some data that I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's fascinating because being emotionally intelligent, some people refer to it as EQ. There's a lot of different ways, that you can phrase it, but essentially it's just being able to respond well in a work environment or a personal environment, whatever environment you're in, being able to respond well and stay in control so you can accomplish more and not sever relationships. So there was this statistic I found fascinating that employees waste more than 2 hours per workday on their phones.
2 hours.
2 hours on their phones. So that's paid time.
I know our team doesn't do that.
That's
I know
paid
I don't
time.
do that.
And then along with that, a study found that only 2.5 people multitask effectively. So you think about it. If they're spending over 2 hours on their phone, but yet they're working, but only 2.5% of the people multitask effectively, that math doesn't quite add up.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing with emotional intelligence, with EQ, is that it promotes mindfulness. It promotes better focus and better clarity.
Yeah, Lisa, because I think when you're in the emotion, you're not really there, right? You're typically, because you haven't dealt with the past well, it's like you're ruminating on something that happened and you're allowing your emotions to kind of spiral. And then almost like you could be emotional about the future a little bit and thinking about I'm worried, concerned, but it really does help that mindfulness.
Absolutely. Well, and it's more than emotional intelligence is more than just your emotions. There's a huge piece of awareness.
Yeah.
And awareness and mindfulness really go together. So your mindfulness, being aware of your surroundings, being aware of your responses. If you're procrastinating, there's a mindfulness and an awareness piece to it.
Yeah.
Super important because that's really when you're most effective, is when you're self-aware, but you're also others aware.
Well, and it's you're really here where you are. And I think sometimes, and I know I've dealt with this, is when I get emotional, it's sometimes I'm thinking about always trying to get there, right? Whatever place, wherever there is, trying to, get this done, get this accomplished. And at least you do not have realized about there is it's a total illusion. Mm-hmm. It's a fantasy. We never really get there. Right? I'm here right now, and in my brain, I'm trying to get there. And the challenge is because I'm always thinking about there, I'm not really effective here. But the problem is that when I get there, it's no longer there. It's here. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's almost like, tomorrow. I think tomorrow is a fantasy. Right? So today, I'm here today and I'm thinking about tomorrow, what's got to happen tomorrow. The problem is I never get to tomorrow because once I get into, say today is Tuesday, and once Wednesday comes, it's no longer tomorrow, it's today.
Right.
And so I think this whole idea, I think why it's so important is really it helps us be present, really mindful and really aware. And that's where we can really create value.
That's when we're most effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting. The whole concept of EQ, the whole concept of emotional intelligence, according to Psychology Today, it's having a high EQ. So those of you that are business owners, managers, CEOs, honestly, those of you that just our employees. This is so important and really valuable. Having a high EQ puts employees on a better path to advancement, which often means having a larger paycheck. Hey, who doesn't want a larger paycheck?
There you go.
And
I'm signing up for that.
Not just a larger paycheck, but also more fulfillment.
Yeah.
And more fulfillment because you find out, hey, what I'm actually passionate about, what I really am passionate about, rather than what my boss tells me this is what you have to work on. It's I'm passionate about this because I know myself well enough. I'm aware enough of what I'm really thrilled and interested in. And so therefore, I'm going to put more energy toward it. And I'm going to be better at it than something that my boss has just told me, hey, this is what you have to do. And, I'm going to get paid more. And I'm all about that.
Yeah, me too. And I think, Lisa, you mentioned something. We're driving in the car here to the studio, and you just mentioned about like, wow, time is really kind of going fast, or all of a sudden it's like, But I think when you're really there, like when you're really here, let me say it this way, and you're really present, I think that's when time slows down. Because I know as I've gotten, healthier on the inside and really become more present, for me, life has started to slow down a little bit. And I think that's where the fun and the enjoyment and really some of that fulfillment,
absolutely,
type of thing. So let's give some tips. I think that would be,
it.
I think it would be super helpful. So tip number one that I thought about is really practicing observing how you feel. Because I think, feelings are just information. Emotions are just information. A lot of times we say, well, that's a bad emotion, or you shouldn't feel that way, but it is simply information. And I think when we should on ourselves, right, it's like, oh, you shouldn't be mad, or you shouldn't be irritated, right? But just realizing, okay, I feel this because I'm thinking something. Something's going on. It's just information. And you do this super well, is just really being a detective. Mm-hmm. I love, how you are just really a detective on that, is that I'm feeling something. And even, Lisa, like it kind of shows up in your body. One of the tools we have is the aggravation activator. And actually inside of that particular course is actually this idea of like, where does emotion show up in your body? And we actually give a graph. So we'll put a link for aggravation activator if that's something you would find helpful. But we actually have discovered that your body kind of keeps a score.
Yeah.
Right. And you actually feel certain things in certain parts of your body.
In certain places. So maybe, your head or your shoulders, your chest, different locations are tied to different experiences and different emotions.
Yeah. And what I've realized is that everybody feels, but sometimes people just don't have access to that. Mm-hmm. Right. I love, inside of the emotionally intelligent, actually digital course, we actually have things like feelings wheel, where we really help people get really clear on like, what am I really feeling?
Well, walking through also not just the feelings wheel, but how do I utilize this on a day-to-day to actually make it work? Because it's great. Everybody knows what a feelings wheel is, but how does this tool make my life more full and productive?
Yeah. And then actually, the emotions clarifier, that particular tool, I'm just thinking about that, is that, it has a section in there is like, what do I want to feel? What am I feeling? Why do I feel it? And then also, what do I want to feel?
Right.
And it's this whole idea of really getting clear on that. Mm-hmm. And then you're able to change it. So one thing, I haven't done this in years, but Lisa, do you remember, I actually used to have a timer on my iPhone where every hour it would go off, and I just asked myself, well, what am I feeling? And
I forgot about that.
Right. Yeah. And I had a feelings wheel actually on my phone, just to become more aware.
To create the habit of increased awareness.
Right. Because part of the problem is that when you're not aware, then you just react. You don't respond, you react. And it's this idea of that first you got to become aware so that you're able to respond. And many people, they just react out of it. And then they have this emotional waste, or sort of this over response. And then they have to clean up the over response. And really, if you were just aware of what was going on currently with you, you could respond at a much healthier and, better way.
Right. So practice
really observing how
you feel. Yeah. And tied into that, and we kind of already talked about it a little bit, is pay attention to how you behave. So this is really fascinating. So this is a poll by Gallup.
Yep.
And Gallup said 70% of engagement variance is attributed to managers' behavior and emotional intelligence. And they were referring to the behavior variance of employees. Mm-hmm. So you've got employees that are really happy and productive and employees that are not. And as Gallup did this study, this poll, they realized it was only 30% hingent on the employee and 70% dependent on the manager and their higher up.
It's sort of how the manager is behaving. Is what you're talking about, right?
The manager's level of emotional intelligence, their quotient, their behavior was the dependence on whether or not the employees were able to be engaged, whether they wanted to be engaged. And so, if you're having trouble in your company, in your group, or your organization with engagement, take a look at your own behavior or the behavior of the leaders and the managers, because if the managers and leaders can increase their emotional quotient, their emotional intelligence, then you're going to have increased engagement by the members, which I found is really fascinating. So notice how do you feel during certain situations?
Yeah.
What are your responses when you feel certain emotions, when you're scared or angry? What are those responses? We can't do anything about something that we're completely unaware of if we're clueless about it. So it's like trying to speak and read German when you've never studied it. You cannot.
That's a good way to say it.
You cannot connect to the engagement of your employees or the engagement of your members if you just are completely unaware and clueless.
Right. Lisa, and one thing that we talk about in our workshops is this idea of you want to say it so you don't display it. Right. And many times when we're not aware, we end up displaying our emotions and almost like act our emotions instead of just communicate what they are. And because really when you think about it, emotions are energy. And what was it? It was probably a while back ago. I remember we were driving in the car and, we were talking and I remember you said, well, Dennis, why are you getting so angry? And I said, well, I'm not angry. And you said, well, your hand is shaking. Right. My hand was shaking. I was like, fine, I'm angry. Right. Because it's got to go somewhere.
Because that energy was coming out.
Yeah,
it was coming out in your hands.
Right.
You weren't even aware that you were angry, but the energy of that anger was showing up. And I could sense it and you couldn't. Yeah.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Just because I was so unaware. There's another time I remember where Melissa, our daughter, came into the kitchen and she says, well, Dad, why are you so angry? And I said, I'm not. And she goes, well, you have angry eyes. And it's almost like it's going to show up. It is absolutely going to show up. So learn to say it so you don't display it. And you literally can get so proficient that you can just say, hey, I feel angry because I'm thinking this, or I feel really frustrated because I'm thinking this. And you don't have to raise your voice.
Yeah.
You're able to communicate it and get it out so that you don't behave out of it.
Yeah. These are all just some strategies and tips and tools that we work through in our emotionally intelligent course. So if you want to dive deeper, we've got that available because we go pretty deep with all of this.
Go a lot deeper,
It's really good.
Another tip is take responsibility for your feelings, right? Own it. I mean, the truth is that your feelings are your choice. Now, that's a big thought. And I understand people get triggered and something happens. We have a flood of emotion and we can't stop it. But at the end of the day, when you think about it, Lisa, it's like, if my emotions are not my choice, then how can I ever control them? I can't. And if I can't control them, then I become just the victim of them. And I think that's sort of the big lie that happens, that you're not the victim. You have to own your feelings. I feel this because I think this. And this idea, because we hear this a lot, is people say, well, she just made me mad, right? She makes me mad. He makes me mad. Right? If I make you mad, then it's kind of like you're the puppet on this, like I do this and you get mad, I do this.
Someone else is in control of me.
Yeah. And we've actually just given our power over. Right. So really, I have something I'm working on, don't have quite, a total handle on it, but getting real good is like, hey, I choose to be frustrated because I think this.
And me as the other party in this, I choose to allow you to be frustrated. I choose you to let you totally go ahead, be frustrated. It's not gonna rock my boat because I can't control if you're frustrated or not. And it could be something directly related between the two of us, but it's your frustration, it's your emotion, it's not mine. And do I wish you weren't frustrated? Absolutely. But you're
you can't
human.
Fix it.
And it's part of passion, and we want some frustration. We want some joy, excitement. If I wasn't frustrated about my cherry tree dying in the front yard, then I would have never pulled it out and put a magnolia in instead. I mean, really, the only reason I have a magnolia in my front yard now is because I was frustrated that my weeping cherry died.
Yeah, and almost like, let your frustration fuel you. See, frustration should fuel you, not finish you. Frustration should fuel you, not finish you. And many times people let their frustration just sort of like finish them and they become the victim. But it's like, that frustration is fuel. That's all it is, right? And you use this emotion to actually go create instead of just complaining.
You said fuel you. I thought you said let your frustration fuel you. And I was like,
no.
Where is he going with this?
I don't know. Yeah,
but let your frustration fuel you.
F-U-E-L.
Okay, I get it now.
Got it?
Got
F-U-E-L.
it. Okay, I was a little confused there for a second.
Okay, next
tip.
one.
take time to celebrate the positive. I personally am a big fan of this one. I love it. You love it too.
Hey, I'm getting better at it too.
You love it too. Okay, so Psychology Today, another thing. Leaders with high EQ, with high emotional intelligence, they inspire teams, they foster a positive work culture, and they drive productivity. So if you as a leader, as a manager, and this goes back to the 70% variance dependent on the managers.
Yeah.
It's like if you want to foster a positive outlook, if you want to drive productivity, if you want to inspire your teams, you want to raise your EQ, raise your emotional intelligence, celebrate the positive, celebrate the good things in life. That builds resilience. And it helps us move past our adversity. It's taking the time to recognize, taking the time to reflect on the positive moments in life. By human nature, bad or negative things, they spread. If you look at the news, it's what sells. Now, thankfully, there are some different newscasts, social media news things that focus strictly on positive. And those are my favorite just because I love them and they make me smile because there's a lot of bad things that happen in the world, but there's so many more good things. And when we focus on the positive, we focus on the good things, it builds up our resilience.
Well, it also kind of creates this momentum in our life, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I think we're always this feeling like I'm always winning. And I think, Lisa, one thing it really does is it helps people become anti-fragile. I think people are very fragile in the world today, right? Something happens and just sort of like but it really creates that resilience and makes people anti-fragile. So really celebrating the positive. And what I love, one thing that we do as a team is we always start every meeting with a positive focus. Something that's going well.
Every single meeting, literally if it's a 30-minute phone call or if it's a 2-hour meeting, it's, hey, what's your positive focus for today?
Well, and I think what happens is because you're more creative when you're positive. And when we always start meetings with going, okay, what do we got to fix? What's not working? What's broken? We actually tackle problems at a place of weakness, not a place of strength. And so we want to go to that place of strength emotionally so that we can be more creative.
What's fascinating too is it doesn't matter how long the meeting is or who's in the meeting. When you always start with, hey, so what's your positive focus for today? The atmosphere completely changes. There's typically a pause. It slows down. There's a peace and calmness that comes in. And there's always a pause and to stop and think and be like, hey, okay. I think my positive focus yesterday in one of our meetings was that the weekend was just a very calm, peaceful, relaxing weekend. And what that did to me physically, mentally, emotionally is it settled me to be able to come into the meeting with a more excited, fresh, resilient perspective.
Right. Well, what's fascinating, I think we have a couple team members that when I first started this, they were like, why are you always starting that way? Do you think I'm negative? Right? And then literally that was the statement. I was like, no, you know what? Here's the deal. I'm doing this for me. Right? This is the game I'm going to play because it's something I'm working on. And the fact that I'm doing it almost every meeting, Lisa, I end up 3 or 4 different times during the day where I got to give a different positive focus.
Absolutely. And that's a really good point is communicating our intent, which we talk a ton about in Emotionally Intelligent also, communicating your intent. So you say, hey, what's your positive focus today? And the team member was like, well, why are you always asking that? Do you feel like I'm negative? Well, because when you initially said, hey, what's your positive focus? We needed to give the intent hey, what's your positive focus? I just want us to start off with a positive perspective. It helps me start the meeting on a good place. So if you do this activity with your team, your family or whatever, tell the intent because people will frequently automatically assume, hey, they must think I'm negative.
Yeah.
Why? Because we go to that negative place in our brains.
Right. It's why we have the intention clarifier as one of the main tools inside of that communication system. So we'll put a link in the show notes. Another tip is learn to look at yourself objectively. Right. I think sometimes when we get in the emotion, right, our clarity is cloudy, our focus is a little bit fuzzy, and it's almost like when we're in the emotion, it's just like we're on drugs. Right, Lisa, do you remember the story of the particular healthcare executive that brought one of his nurses in and was going to have this conversation with her? And I remember I called her that afternoon and I said, "Hey, Katie, how'd it go?" And she says, "Well, Dennis, I brought her in and I started to talk to her and I'm on the phone, right? And she says, and I brought her in and she threw down her hair." Right. And I was on the phone, Lisa, and I was like, "What? You throw down your hair?" She's from Des Moines, Iowa. And I thought, "You're from Iowa." Right. I said, "Do you throw down your hair? Is that an Iowa term?" And, she said, Dennis, she said she got so mad and so angry that she took off her wig. She said, I didn't know she had a wig on, and threw it on the ground, was stomping at it, yelling. Right. And it's almost like, wow, how can a 45-year-old woman act like a 10-year-old? But this is what happens when you're not objective. You get into the emotion. Mm-hmm. So I think really help if you can learn to look at yourself objectively. So one thing that I do and I kind of practice is almost like thinking of myself in the third person. Right? I'll go through scenarios and go, I wonder why Dennis got so angry at that. What was going on in Dennis's mind? Right? What was Dennis afraid of when that happened? And
it kind of places you outside of your body, looking on as a third person to observe a situation.
Yeah, and I think that power of observation, because when we want the reason that we want to bring these things out into the light is so that we observe them. Mm-hmm. And then when we observe them, then we can make strategies and change. And one thing that has really helped me, Lisa, is this idea is that, right now today, I'm currently doing the best I can with what I have. Right. So sometimes we look back at the past and we get so mad and angry and, bitter or hurtful, or I did this, and we beat ourselves up, but realizing that, hey, last year, this is the best I could with what I had. And almost like looking at other people objectively that way, and is that, hey, they're doing the best they can. Right. And so it's this idea of like just being objective. And sometimes you need some help, right? Because you can't read the label when you're inside the bottle.
Right.
So learn to look at yourself objectively. One way that I do it is just thinking of myself in the third person. Next tip, we want to talk about understanding what motivates you.
Yes, understanding what motivates you.
Yeah.
Hang on, I lost my notes here. There we go.
Okay.
We're all motivated by different drivers.
Yep.
Okay, different drivers. When we start a project, and then we have difficulty in the middle of the project because we kind of lose our motivation, we lose our concentration.
It never happens to me. I'm glad. I'm glad I don't have that issue.
And a lot of times we start a project and we don't truly understand what's driving us. We're like, hey, I really want to, spring is coming. I really want to clean up the yard and, do spring cleaning and but the weather's really nice, or I'm really tired this weekend, or...
Is that really like being real intentional on your why? Like
it's
why
exactly.
This is important?
It's exactly being intentional on your why. When you take time to understand what's truly driving you, like why do you want this? Why is it important to you? You can more easily push through to the end.
Okay. Yeah. And I think, Lisa, because whenever I've lost my way, I've always lost my why first.
And your why has to be bigger than all of the things that come after you. So cleaning, doing a spring cleanup on your yard but I really want to go see a movie, or the weather's really nice. Well, making your why big enough in advance in the front. And then when you come to the adversity, your why's big enough, your intent's big enough that it's more powerful.
Right. It's like, do I want the ice cream or do I want a smaller waist?
Right.
And hey, the reality is sometimes I want the ice cream.
Sometimes you do.
Sometimes I do. And just getting really, really clear, because you're right. It's like we got to go through challenges. We got to push through obstacles, and that takes energy. Mm-hmm. And your why really creates your energy. So for you to be able to go through obstacles, you have to have a big why that gives you really energy to kind of push through those things. Yeah. Right? Kind of push through the hard things.
Yep.
Another tip is acknowledge your emotional triggers. So at least make sure.
That's a big one.
It's huge, right? Because what happens is we get flooded with emotion.
Yeah.
But when you look at it as information and you look at it as something to serve you, not become a slave to it. And at least make sure I have this right, is that a trigger is an irrational response to a rational or irrational event.
Right.
Right. And so it's like something happens and it's an irrational response. Now, it could be an irrational event. Like somebody could say something that's totally irrational, but it's my response. And it's really why we created the trigger identifier. Yeah. Because it really, when I go through the trigger identifier, and Lisa, how many of those have you worked through? Like how many situations? Hundreds? Gazillions, right? I've worked through, maybe not quite as many. You've done gazillion. I've maybe done a couple hundred. But what I've realized, Lisa, is that there becomes patterns. Mm-hmm. I realize there's certain patterns. I mean, one pattern for me is that when I feel disrespected.
Yeah.
right? Something happens and it creates, or this trigger of abandonment or this trigger
Right.
of disrespect. Those are two big triggers for Dennis.
And those
But
tend to be unmet needs in your world. So
yeah,
therefore it's something that sets off that trigger.
right. And realizing, okay, this is just information. It's there to serve me. It's giving me some feedback.
Right.
Right? It's just giving me feedback. That's all it is on something that's going internal. Then I can step back and not act out of it.
Mm-hmm.
When I realize, hey, I'm just flooded with emotion. And something that we've learned, Lisa, is just to sort of separate yourself for a season, or maybe for a minute or 10 minutes, or, it's like, hey, just
take a break.
Take a break, pause, give me a minute so that I don't just react out of it, but I really respond.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Another one is avoid complaining.
Avoid complaining. So complaining implies.
We never do this, do we?
I rarely complain.
That is true. I complain often.
No, you used to complain often.
Yeah.
Well,
it's because I was really good at playing the victim.
Right.
You know?
I think you were good at playing the victim, and which is fascinating because complaining, it implies two things. Number one, we're a victim. If we're complaining about something, I'm a victim. And the second thing that complaining implies is there isn't a solution to the problem.
And that's a big lie.
Right. That's a big lie. When you complain, it puts you in the seat of, I'm a victim and there's no solution.
Well, you know what's fascinating, Lisa? We have a particular client that I realized one of the team members, and I was talking to some of our team that's working with this particular group. And I mentioned to Nancy, I said, this person needs the boss to be the villain. She needs him to be a bad guy because that just reinforces her victimhood.
Right.
She doesn't take responsibility for her own.
She needs, in an unhealthy emotional way, for her boss to be a villain. Not she needs her boss to be the villain because that's how they work well together.
Right. And she's always complaining about him. I mean, every time I see her, she's complaining. In fact, Nancy came back and said, "Hey, she's always complaining." I go, "Right, because she needs to be the victim in this situation."
Yeah, that's where she feels comfortable, is being a victim. That's her status quo, is victimhood.
Yeah, so it's almost like victims complain, but victors create. And you can complain or create. You just can't do both at the same time. So almost like choose your path.
Right. Yeah, because rarely does a person with a high EQ or a high emotional intelligence, rarely do they feel like a victim, and even less frequently do they feel that the answer is not attainable.
Yeah. I think that's the sad thing.
We take this perspective when you have higher emotional intelligence or higher EQ, you take the perspective to think constructively. You're like, okay, how can I resolve this and be the best me, rather than looking at someone else to place the blame on, and it's someone else's responsibility to fix it.
Yeah, and what's fascinating, we teach this in our workshops, is that all victimhood comes out of choice poverty. People feel like, I don't have a choice, right? And when I don't have a choice, it's obviously easier to complain, right? It's like, well, if I don't have a choice, then the next best thing is to complain. But that's the big lie, because you always have a choice. There's always something you can do.
Right. I'm a victim. There isn't a solution to my problem.
Yeah.
And so I don't have a choice. This is just my lot in life.
Yeah. And so another one that we've seen, another sort of hack, is don't dwell on the past.
Yeah.
And when you understand the purpose of the past, I think it's really helpful, right? Because people that don't understand the purpose, like I think the purpose of the past is for learning and information. That's all it is, right? And really, if you don't understand that, you end up with sad, anger, guilt, shame, resentment, right? But when you can look back and go, okay, what did I learn from this? And I think, Lisa, people that dwell in the past, it means they haven't got all the information from the past.
Right.
I know if there are past situations that I have like a lot of like emotion attached to it, it just means I haven't learned everything from that past. Yeah. So don't stop dwelling on the past, right? It's like the present is what you have right now.
On the other hand, the opposite of that is dwelling on the past. This is a little trick that we do when we go to different places, go to different countries or family vacations. We'll bring home a mug, typically. Yeah. From that place, or something that we would use on a daily basis. So when we went to Spain, 2 years ago, we brought back a mug that just reminds us of that trip, and it was a fantastic trip with one of our sons and his girlfriend at the time, and It was just a fascinating, really fun, memorable, good vibes kind of trip. And so in the morning, I'm like, okay, where do I want to go this morning? I think I'm going to go to Spain. And when I go to Spain, I'm going to dwell on the past in that was a fabulous time of connection, of joy and adventure. And so I choose actually to dwell on the past and all the positive things that kind of come with it. Well, which the term dwell on the past, we just automatically take as negative. And I'm choosing to change that term.
Well, you know what? I think we need to just make up the right past. Right? It's like, was it a learning event or was it a negative event?
Right. Because there were things that happened in that trip that did not go well. And you know what? Honestly, I cannot think of one thing right now that didn't go well, because I have focused on all of the amazing things that we did and how fun it was.
Yeah. And in this way, it's like we utilize the past for our benefit, not our detriment.
Exactly.
And you choose how you want to use the past. So if you're choosing the past to become a detriment, it's like, that's not helpful.
More power to you.
Yeah, I guess you're ridiculously in charge of you. You can do what you want to do, right? But we're choosing to always use the past and make up the past that is a benefit and help to us, not a detriment and hindrance.
Absolutely. Okay. And then our last tip on just having high emotional intelligence and being able to be really productive and happy is to avoid selfishness. So often we are driven, those very high-performing individuals, very driven individuals, sometimes they can tend to be a little bit selfish because they are passionate about what they want and what they're going to accomplish. And when it comes down to it, selfishness overused, which selfishness in general is a negative term. Selfishness pushed too far really brings disunity and it really destroys relationships. Fascinating. So this was another study. The estimated annual cost of workplace conflict in the U.S. is $359 billion in lost time and productivity. And this is based on a report from CPP Global Human Capital. Fascinating. $359 billion because of workplace conflict. And you know what? Rather than pushing so hard to get ahead and running over people down, just running them down in the process, try considering other people's needs. I guarantee you it will bring that workplace conflict down, and it will bring that money that you spend trying to mitigate the conflict way down.
Yes, it's a way to create productivity, really, right? So we got a big mission, right? We're on a mission to save the world, $359 billion. It's a big mission we're on. Gosh, Lisa, this has been fun. I think for me, I'm thinking about my takeaway and what's kind of hitting my brain is that I'm going to go back to the trigger identifier because I've realized that that's a tool that we have that over the last couple of months I've gotten away from just personally. And I know there's things that have been triggering me, and stepping back and working back through that tool and really using it as information. So, literally it's like you don't have to be a victim to your triggers. I don't have to be a victim to my triggers. It's a response, and that response is giving me information. So triggers are just information. That's all they are. So what about you, Lisa? What's kind of hitting your brain?
I think it's absolutely fascinating. So, our first 3 tips on emotional intelligence is practicing how you feel, paying attention to how you behave, and taking responsibility for your feelings. And going back to that stat of 70% of engagement variance is attributed to managers' behavior and emotional intelligence. So if your people are just not really engaged, then I think you need to look at you. Yes, it is their responsibility, but look at you as the leader. Look at you as the manager. Take responsibility for how you feel, how you behave, and for your feelings. Yeah.
Yep, because we teach what we know, but we produce who we are.
Wow. It's
been fun. Okay, we'll put a link for the Emotionally Intelligent course in that communication system so you can get the communication system and really create the team that really produces great results. I think our work is done here. We'll see you next time on the Drama Free Living Podcast.